Welcome to the 77th episode of Total Pod Mode, your weekly comedy gaming podcast. My name is Will, and I also go by Hoodafunk, and I'm joined here by my good friend, co-host, and fellow gaming enthusiast, James, aka Mr. Bames.
What's going on, everyone?
Coming up this episode, we've got our weekly regular games catch-up, followed by the weekly gaming news, where we discuss big news in the world of Sony as part of their State of Play event, some Pokemon Company news following the release of Pal Worlds, and then we'll cover some interesting Bloodborne news, James.
Ooh, excitement. Although, to be fair, if it's not Bloodborne coming out on PC, it's not that exciting to me. But hey, maybe it is. Maybe it is. We'll see.
You gotta listen on to find out. And then we'll round off this episode with a new game on Completionist Corner. But before we talk about all of that, it's time to crack on with the socials. You can, as always, find the podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and pretty much anywhere else you get your podcasts by searching for Total Pod Mode.
We also post regular video content of our playthroughs, stream highlights, as well as the podcast on our YouTube channel, Total Pod Mode.
You can also find us on X by searching for @TotalPodMode, all one word.
And whilst you're there, you can find me at Mr. Bames, and I'm also on Twitch under twitch.tv/MrBames_TPM.
And you can find me at Hoodafunk on X, and I'm also on Twitch under twitch.tv/Hoodafunk. Okay, James, it's time for the catch-up. What have you been playing this week?
I don't have a great deal to talk about this week, unfortunately. I did play a little bit more of Baldur's Gate 3 this week, but not really too much to talk about because it's kind of more of the same. I'm still exploring Baldur's Gate itself.
Yeah.
It's quite a large area of the map. There's a lot of things going on. And you can do this in the rest of the game as well, but in Baldur's Gate specifically, you can kind of do all of the quests in any order you want. And I assume that will have permutations on how certain things actually end up going.
Yeah.
A lot of the cool stuff I've been doing is all main quest related, so it's kind of story spoilers. One thing that's kind of interesting is that there's a lot more cats in the city.
All right, okay.
For whatever reason, all of the cats are either evil or like have a superiority complex, which I just find quite amusing. And because I can talk to animals.
That's what I was just about to ask. I assume you've got the ability that allows you to do that.
Yeah, I'm a forest gnome, so I get that as part of my daily perks, if you like. I can use that spell once per long rest, and it lasts until I die.
Okay, sure thing.
So I talk to all the animals and stuff, and the cats are just very funny. Being lazy, telling you to go kill rats so that they can feed.
Okay.
But other than that, it's just really been a case of exploring the areas, picking up all random side quests, doing a few bits. Speaking of talking animals, that's a side quest that I can talk about. I did talk to a carrier pigeon who was voiced by someone who sounds like an army sergeant.
I am Commander Lightfeather, leader of the finest aerial communication regiment this side of the Triumpha.
One of the side missions involves finding some missing posts.
Okay.
And because I could talk to the carrier pigeon, he was like, oh yeah, it's all coming from over there, and a lot of my cadets haven't come back, and all that sort of stuff. So that was mildly amusing. I'm nearly at the level cap. The level cap is 12 in this game. I'm at level 11, feeling pretty powerful, which is great. And the story's progressing really nicely. I can see, as I've said many times before at this point, I can see how the replayability value is going to be so good. Particularly doing an evil playthrough when I finally go back and do that at some point. It's going to be very fun to see how certain things work differently.
Well, considering that we've just finished the Mass Effect trilogy, and you and I both had some things to say about the ending and the way that played out, do you get the sense in this game that the endings will truly diverge and actually result in fully different outcomes? Or are you seeing a path that you'll lead down and you'll eventually need to make a choice more akin to Mass Effect?
So because I've looked at the achievements, I kind of know the number of endings that there are, if you see what I mean.
Oh, okay.
They will diverge in what I believe will be a significant enough way that it will be interesting. And let's say you diverge down one of two paths. Each of those paths can fork as well into various other factors, which may end up being very similar to one another, but I don't know until I get there. It certainly isn't going to be as crap as the Mass Effect 3 choice at the end was. And there will be more differences in a good and evil playthrough. I can just tell. I'm sure that a lot of the main quest lines will eventually lead kind of to the same place. You'll probably still have to kill the same main bosses, whether you're good, evil, or anything in between. But the way you get to there will probably be a lot more nuanced in Baldur's Gate 3 than it was in Mass Effect 3 for sure.
Fine. Okay, well, I am looking forward to when you put some more time into that, to hearing just how the end plays out. I know you haven't been keen to discuss it on the podcast for a while, but off pod, I'm looking forward to figuring out just what happens.
I'm more than happy to discuss it. I just feel that the game's new enough and it's got enough hype around it that I don't want to give any story stuff away. Maybe at some point I will diverge all information, but for now, I'm going to be nice to the people that don't want spoilers.
All right, then, keep your secrets.
Maybe by the time you've got to the end of Baldur's Gate, that might be a reasonable window. Is there like a defined window for spoilers? Shout out in the comments if you know what that is. Is there like a specific window after something's released? I know spoilers are kind of in one sense never okay for certain things because you can ruin a whole experience, but I wonder if there is a defined window for certain things where it's kind of okay for an internet spoiler if it's fairly generic, provided you put some warnings in.
I figure a year is probably legit.
A year? Yeah, okay, yeah.
But it depends on the game, right? Like Death Stranding, I don't think you can spoil that ever.
No,
Because
yeah,
otherwise,
that's
I mean, sorry
game
for
ruined.
Completionist Corner last year when we did just that. But
Hey, people knew what they were listening
Exactly,
to.
exactly.
We spent
We
like
warned you.
6 f***ing episodes rolling up to the end. If you didn't want to hear the ending of Death Stranding, you could have pulled the brakes on any episode.
Exactly.
You only get yourselves to blame if you blame us for spoilering Death Stranding.
you see what I mean, though? Because Death Stranding,
Yeah.
in my opinion, is a game where once you know what happens, it's kind of the replayability goes a little bit. For me, certainly from a story perspective. From a gameplay perspective, you can play that as much as you want.
You can't just sit someone down to watch Star Wars and then you tell them that Darth Vader's Luke's father right off the bat.
Exactly, yeah. Baldur's Gate, I don't think is probably quite like that, which is why I say a year. Because it's Game of the Year, right? I didn't play it for a couple of months after it came out, and I'm an avid RPG player. There's plenty of people that probably haven't picked it up yet, yourself included, right? So I'm just trying to be nice to that section of the audience, basically. But yeah, so other than that, I haven't really played much else apart from our Completionist Corner game, which we won't go into now. So that's me for the catch-up this week. How about you, man? What you been playing?
So this week, I've been playing a very new release. I've actually picked up a copy of Tekken 8. Tekken released on the 26th of January, so I've actually put some time into this.
I'm a little surprised you picked this up, to be honest, because I remember we spoke about it and neither of us said we would day one it, so I'm a bit surprised, but pleasantly so.
A surprise, to be sure, but a welcome one.
It was mostly because of the hype of one of our buddies, Liam. He picked it up, and that was the immediate fold over for me.
The
I just
Monster
immediately
Hunter
picked it up
Rise
as well.
effect. Yes, I know it well.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it happens, doesn't it? When you've got a buddy that's picked up a new game, the temptation to also play along when it's something that's either competitive or cooperative, it just wins out for me. I actually find that a lot of the games that I'll pick up prioritize games that my friends are playing over games that I necessarily want to play myself, because playing a game with friends can really just make it so much better than your average experience.
I don't disagree. I am the polar opposite of that, though. I'm a selfish gamer.
You hold off.
Yeah. So how is it, dude? Tell all. Is it markedly better than 7?
There's a few key differences in terms of the way that the combat works. So the main thing that I'd like to mention is the heat meter in the game, which is entirely new. And you might remember the rage system from Tekken 7, where it got to the point where if your fighter got to a certain percentage of low health, they would activate this kind of red shiny mode on your character.
Yeah.
And that would enable you to perform a special finishing move, and they were kind of like quite cinematic special moves that you could do. They have retained that for Tekken 8, but they've also added a new mode called Heat. And rather than Rage mode that activates when you're low health, this mode actually starts with a full bar at the very start of the game, and you can choose to apply it whenever you want to at any point in the fight.
Well, it just helps you press the offensive a bit more.
It does, yeah. It's a full-on offensive move thing that you probably would typically engage if you've lost a lot of health down and you haven't managed to do much to other players, because activating this mode, it adds additional chip damage to characters as well as just increasing your general move set, and you can do a bunch more different powerful moves as well throughout that.
Fair.
It does change up the way that the game plays, given that you've got this whole additional mode that has a potential window for dealing loads of extra damage.
And is it one and done, or can you recharge it by attacking your enemies?
It's one and done per round.
Okay. So in a best of 3, you'd get it recharged at the start of each new stock, if you like.
Yeah.
Okay. Interesting.
And whilst you're in that mode, you can do various different moves, and there are also different combos that you can do that will bring you into heat mode as well. So you can be doing a punch combo that will then activate heat mode halfway through, and then you can finish it off with a special move. So the range of moves and combos that you're allowed to do goes way much further than it did in Tekken 7.
Okay.
And I guess my two favourite characters at the moment, it's probably a combo between Azucena, who does a lot of juking and diving and dodging with her attacks.
Is that a new one?
Yeah, she's a new character. Yeah, so both of the characters that I'll mention are new characters.
Okay.
As we've seen her being able to duck past punches, dodge attacks, and then follow up with combos, and being able to have dodges almost in the middle of your combos is a really, really cool thing to be able to do with her. And the other character that I want to talk about is a guy called Victor. He's kind of like a shaded, suited dude with a electro katana, and he just has some really cool sword fighting combos as well. It's cool to see something that rivals Yoshimitsu, but plays very differently as well.
Nice to see a bit more weaponry involved as well.
Yes.
Shoutouts to Kunamitsu and her knife back in the day.
I am noticing a lot of use of weapons in this game. Nunchucks are on the cards now in Tekken. It's no longer just an Iron Fist tournament. They're bashing each other up with nunchucks.
Hey, Soul Calibur's great. It's good to see Soul Calibur 7's been released in a Tekken suit.
Even Nina actually just brings straight out guns into the warfare, because with her special rage mode ability, she can activate a move where she offloads a couple of pistol clips into someone. So,
nice.
And for the most part, I'm just having a fun time checking out the different characters, fooling around with combos in the test mode. I haven't taken it online yet, and I haven't played through any of the character stories or the regular story mode in the game yet. At the moment, I'm just very keen to learn a character and get good with them so I can actually start to consider going online. And I think that once I've settled with a character and I've got some good combos down, then I'll be able to absolutely wipe the floor with the story mode or anything like that, just by being intuitively a bit more familiar with the controls and figuring out likely combos just by feeling my way around a character instead of having to go into the moves list constantly and check all of the different stuff they can do.
Yeah, makes sense. The story's kind of centered around Devil Jin in this one, isn't it? So Mishima nonsense.
Mishima is absolutely still around. However, the demise of Heihachi happened in Tekken 7.
Yeah, but as we called at the time when we covered it in Completionist Corner, he's probably still alive.
Yeah, I know.
He'll somehow still be alive. He'll be the secret final boss. You beat Devil Jin, everything looks great, and then suddenly you'll hear a slam on the floor, some electricity, and you'll have to fight Heihachi.
Yeah, I can see it. I don't think it'll happen in this round of Tekken, but I feel like at some point in a DLC down the line, they'll drop Heihachi back into the game.
Yeah.
I'd be very surprised if it wasn't the case.
He'll certainly be a playable character, even if he's not in the story.
Yeah, I'm sure that they'll bring him back as a playable character at some point because he's just such a serious favourite. It's kind of like printing free money at that point for themselves if they release Heihachi at some point.
Yeah, and I'm sure there's some people in competitive that want to... I know he's not a top tier character, but I'm sure there's some people in competitive that will be like, we want Heihachi back.
Heihachi's been in it for a long time and he's kind of missing from the roster. And speaking of characters that are missing from the roster, Eddie Gordo is also out of the base roster for this game. However, he has been confirmed as the first DLC character that's going into the game. So looking forward to getting back and playing in the sandals of my man Eddie Gordo as well. But I gotta say, other than that, I don't have a great deal to talk about with Tekken. Still very much dipping my toes into it, and I look forward to covering it at some point next week, maybe. And with all of that said, it's time to move on to the weekly gaming news. So our first article today. The PlayStation State of Play event took place this week on the 31st of January. So a couple of the main events, according to me. The first one up that I'd like to talk about, of course, is Death Stranding 2.
A game that I know you're incredibly hyped for because you love Death Stranding 1. One of your favourite games.
I think so, yeah. I could probably list it up in that category, I think. I had a really good time playing through it the first time around and the second time around on Completionist Corner. And James, I've got to say, Kojima has somehow done it again. He has absolutely flummoxed me in terms of what the hell is going on in this game.
I have to say that doesn't surprise me because Kojima's Kojima.
Off the wall.
But I am interested in how that would work because the end of Death Stranding was pretty wild and I don't really know how it's going to continue or even where it's going to go, frankly.
On the release of Death Stranding 1, I spent the entire trailer completely confused as to what was going on at all. And even with the now added context of Death Stranding 1 in place for me, I still was unable to surmise what is going on in the storyline. Death Stranding 1 comprised all of America, or was supposed to anyway, as you travel across the United States, rebuilding America. We get a bit of a reveal in this trailer, because they actually mentioned that they're going to Mexico. I'm also wondering whether the line finishes at Mexico or whether there will be other points in the world that we can also travel to.
Well, if they're heading south to Mexico, surely the logical next step would be South America, right?
Well, who knows?
Or the Caribbean, baby.
Wouldn't it be interesting to see what landscapes look like in a kind of Death Stranding version that was based outside of America? I think it'd be really interesting to see what they do with the change of environment. Although there were quite a few different biomes covered in Death Stranding 1, I'd really like to see how they can manage to vary those in a new game. And you do get a little sense of that in the trailer. You see different environmental hazards that we haven't seen previously. We see something that resembles a flood in the game. A river begins to overflow, and it actually destroys one of the bridges that's been constructed in the game as well.
That's an interesting mechanic.
It does kind of muck around with the permanence of some of the structures that you could install in the game. Although you do need to keep repairing them, a lot of the structures would last a long time. But if you're regularly experiencing floods in certain areas, then you can never really count on your equipment being there when you come back.
Unless you can build flood barriers and things like that.
Yeah, that's a good decision.
More construction.
We also see the return of a couple familiar faces, other than Sam Porter Bridges, of course. So we see Fragile in the game, who now appears to be working for a new company known as Drawbridge. And apparently they're like a new civilian outfit that are operating outside of the regular UCA coverage, which of course is the network that you were building before. So there's a new faction in the game. We also see the return of Higgs at some point. Higgs has survived the old Death Stranding apocalypse scenario that we had previously.
Okay.
And we also see a scene early on in the trailer of Fragile actually apparently resurrecting him from some sort of tomb that he was in. I guess he was somehow suspended and kept alive.
Why'd Fragile do that?
I have no idea. I don't think it was necessarily implied that she was the one that put him in it, but she was the one cutting him out of it at the beginning of the trailer, along with another character who we haven't been introduced to yet.
But she wanted him dead more than anyone.
Yeah, it's bizarre. This is what I mean. Like, I'm not pretending that any of this is going to make sense or I'm going to have any answers for you because, as I say, with this trailer, all it does is generate more questions in my head rather than solve any of the questions that I already had about the game. Higgs also, and you have to check this out in the trailer, has a new weapon in the game. He seems to be armed with like an electric guitar gun that he uses to great effect. He like strum a sweet little tune and then shoot a bunch of guys with it. It's very interesting. It obviously looks like a heavily modified robotic guitar. It isn't just like a straight up like Gibson or a Les Paul or something.
Oh, right. For some reason, I'm picturing Flying V.
Yeah. It's closer to a Flying V than any of the other types that I just described, but it's got a unique style to it. It does seem more zany than the first Death Stranding, and it does seem like we're going to be experiencing a whole load more wacky adventures for Sam Porter Bridges, that's for sure.
Two things. Expect a lawsuit from Rare because Donkey Kong 64 did that first. But in all seriousness, though, I don't know how I feel about a more zany Death Stranding. I'm not sure. I need to see more before I form too big an opinion on it.
You would definitely have to watch the trailer. It doesn't feel like the tone has drastically shifted, but it is still very weird. Very weird.
If it's like a little bit of Kojima bollocks sprinkled in there, I'm down. But if it's like Saints Row suddenly, in my mind will kind of ruin the ambience of the game, which is a big thing. The ambience is like 90% of the game.
They also do talk about being on a ship for portions of the game as well. And I'll be interested to know where that actually takes you.
That brings the Caribbean back onto the table, genuinely.
Yeah, yeah.
Like it does.
We'll really have to see.
Could also do South America, I suppose. But there was a boat in the first one, right? So it could just be something as simple as crossing from Area 1 to Area 2. We just don't know.
They just seem to make a larger deal out of it in this trailer. Not that they made any deal out of it in any sort of initial promo. But the fact that they've gone into quite an extensive detail of the boat, they even show you part of the crew quarters in the trailer, as well as even showing you Sam's apartment with like his weapons rack and things like that. There's a lot of familiar imagery that you'll recognize from the first game just implanted into the ship.
Maybe it's your hub then.
Hey, it could well be. If that's where we end up going, maybe you use the ship as your hub and travel around different countries. That would be awesome.
Could be, yeah. Not just Mexico, could be worldwide in that instance.
Yeah, that's exactly what I'm wondering. Mexico was named in the trailer, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's just Mexico. It could be anywhere.
Mexico's the logical first step.
It borders. Yeah. But anyway, I mean, I could go on all episode about my excitement for Death Stranding 2. We probably shouldn't linger on it for too long, considering we're actually talking about the PlayStation State of Play event. So I'll bring us on to a bit more footage for Dragon's Dogma 2, which I've got to say, considering the earlier footage we saw, which I think was at the Summer Games Fest. Was it at the Summer Games Fest or was it at the Game Awards? I can't remember, but we did get to see some initial footage of it. And we both said that we hadn't noticed a great deal of change from the first game in terms of graphics and things like that. The gameplay looks remarkably familiar as well. However, I will say in this new trailer, you definitely get a sense that they've changed things up and improved things in a big way as well. The melee combat in the game looks really satisfying, and the transitions between grabbing, climbing up, and then doing melee attacks off of enemies, as well as some of the more combat mage techniques you can use. You can use magical weapons and abilities to quickly mount enemies and do big damage. It does look like you can play a really active part in combat regardless of what character you play, and I'm really excited to make my own character in that game and explore some of the systems, because although I haven't played Dragon's Dogma 1 properly yet, I have heard that there's a really good amount of variation in terms of the classes you can create there, and if I'm just going to go ahead and jump into Dragon's Dogma 2, I'm sure that they'll have just improved upon that even more.
Yeah, in my limited experience with Dragon's Dogma 1, there's certainly loads of options, but you have to know what you're doing to create an optimal build. You can sort of make something quite depending on what you do. But I guess it's all experimenting, and I think you can respec, so it should be fine. I'm more interested to see how the pawn system works. I'm hoping that the AI is a little better with it.
You'll have to remind me about this pawn system. I remember you've described it to me before, but the moment that you start talking about the pawn system, my head just goes to the naughty content, and I just immediately forget everything else. I can't lie.
You little pervert.
That's fair enough. So you create a sort of second character, if you like, who is called your pawn, P-A-W-N.
Yes.
And you pick their class and you pick how they level up and stuff. Typical examples are, if you're a mage, you'll build a tank pawn so that it synergizes nicely with your build. Likewise, if you're a tank, you might build a healer. If you're an archer, you might build a rogue or something that can draw enemies' attention but doesn't get hit too much. There's all sorts of things you can do with it. But the AI, it learns what role it's going to play by itself. I think you can influence it in certain ways, but I found it very, very hard to understand and actually do effectively. Okay. My pawns just ended up collecting items. That was all they did. They'd stop fighting an enemy to go pick up a nut.
Oh, right.
And stuff like that. So hopefully it's a little bit more user-friendly, and I don't want it to be like super easy to manipulate, because I think there should be a challenge to it to get the satisfaction of making a good pawn. But I'd like it to be a little bit more tutored, I guess. I'd like to know a little bit more about how you can affect it instead of just sitting in a chair and answering questions to try and change their personality.
Well, it all remains to be seen just how they'll handle that in the system. They may even choose to streamline it instead. But I am very interested in terms of actually playing this game, I gotta say. I think for fans of third-person adventure fighting games, this one, it definitely rings a lot of familiar bells. It obviously does look very familiar to Dragon's Dogma 1, but I have the feeling that this has the potential, off the back of more popular recent fantasy franchise games, to actually hook in a larger audience this time round. And I think that this one's going to do pretty well, provided that it actually functions well as a game and isn't a total glitch fest, which I'm somewhat reluctant to believe is going to be the case.
Well, it's Capcom, right?
Yeah, exactly that.
If the combat is better than it was in the first one, that'll pique my interest quite a bit, because the combat's okay in the first one, but it's not the best. Old game though, so pinch of salt. I guess I'll keep an eye on it, although I won't pick it up until I finish the first one, because that's just how I roll these days.
Coming up on the rest of the showcase, another game that I wanted to talk about is Rise of the Ronin, which is a game that we talked a little bit about on a previous podcast episode. Again, kind of going back to one of those Jeff Keighley events. I can never quite remember which one's which.
I feel like that one was more recent, so that was probably the Game Awards.
That was probably the Game Awards, was it? Okay, yes. So we got a little bit of a peek at Rise of the Ronin, and following on at this showcase, we got a much bigger peek at Rise of the Ronin in terms of gameplay, which was really cool. Immediately, I was noticing that the world seems quite large and explorable, and in order to explore that world, you're given quite a few different traversal options as well. There's actually a section that I saw where your character is able to jump off a tall structure, use a hang glider type thing to fly across the map, and then jump onto their horse fairly seamlessly as they were traveling. So there's a lot of emphasis on traversal at speed, and I really like the look of that. That was a good warm up to the start of the trailer. Other than that, you did get a good look at the combat as well, and it has a parrying system that looks similar to something like Sekiro or similar titles like that. There is a stance breaking system. There are 2 bars, one to represent health and one to represent what I assume is posture or poise or whatever. And there were obviously finishing killing blows once you'd broken that poise as well.
Oh, so Sekiro. Okay, cool.
Yeah. Like I said, it's all familiar stuff, but it's cool to see. Also, like Sekiro, you've also got a grappling hook. However, you get to see some interesting functionality that you didn't get in Sekiro, which is you can actually use it offensively as well. There is a stealth mechanic in this game. You can actually use your grappling hook to latch enemies off of high places. So if you don't want to sneak up into a tower, for instance, you can use your grappling hook to grab an enemy and pull them off and then assassinate them from stealth still. So that is quite a cool addition in the game. I like the sound of being able to do those sorts of moves as well. And seeing a different use for the grappling hook is cool.
So it's Sekiro mixed with Just Cause. That's what I'm hearing when you say this.
I think you're oversimplifying it perhaps a little bit there, but there is some similarities, I guess, yeah, except that this is much more of a stealth mechanic, whereas I don't think you could ever really be stealthy ever in Just Cause.
No, that game's not about stealth.
Yeah,
no.
That game's about going loud and blowing shit up.
Yeah, but all the whole moving quickly, traversal at pace with grappling hooks and stuff, that's very Just Cause.
Yeah.
Hopefully better than Just Cause, I might add.
The comparisons to Just Cause in terms of having a grappling hook, that's where it ends. The rest of it is much more familiar territory, as I mentioned, to something like Ghost of Tsushima, Sekiro, Wolong, or similar titles like that. So I do think that this game's going to be really up your street. And the other two games on my list that I wanted to move on to are actually from the same franchise, and I'll talk about the one that I hadn't heard so much about first. So that is Silent Hill: The Short Message, which looks to be a new FPS Silent Hill title.
Is this the one that's free to play? Or is
Is
allegedly,
it free to play?
There's one I saw an article that said like there's allegedly going to be like a free to play Silent Hill game. Is it called Last Message? Oh yeah, it could be this because I thought it was called The Last Message, but it's The Short Message here. Maybe it is.
Okay. Oh, I had no idea that it was actually free to play.
I'm pretty sure that I saw an article that said it was going to be free to play.
Ooh, okay, well that's even more of a reason to be interested. So this game definitely looks like it borrows a lot from the Silent Hill PT release, the demo for an upcoming, now cancelled Silent Hill project by Hideo Kojima.
And Guillermo del Toro.
It's also, I think, playing on perhaps a little bit of the popularity of the recent Resident Evil FPS titles, Resident Evil 7 and RE Village.
We're calling 7 an FPS?
It's a first person. We can drop the S, but it's still a first person.
Has a
And it
gun
has
in it, I
shooting in
suppose.
it. Yeah, shooting is a key component of the gameplay, I guess.
Yeah.
So it definitely looks like that's kind of where it's reaching from. I'm seeing a lot of creepy imagery, and it looks like it'd be really immersive to play that from a new perspective. Although I say new perspective, Silent Hill has actually gone down the FPS route before, actually, and in this case you really can just drop the S because there was no shooting involved in the first person sections. But in Silent Hill 4 The Room, you would walk around your own apartment and have a few ghostly encounters, whereas this game is, or looks to be, entirely from that perspective.
Fair play. And is it James Sunderland still?
No, it's an entirely new character. Typically with Silent Hill games, they vary up the protagonist each time. It's never necessarily set on just one person.
Okay, fair enough.
And this does look to be a new character, a female character, for the second time in the series. You only get very glimpsing shots of the character, or what I presume is your character. One thing that had me slightly concerned about this was it does feature a speaking protagonist. Your character does speak in the game, and I find that a lot of the time that can kind of take you out of the shoes of your character a lot if they're just kind of constantly muttering their own thoughts about things that you're experiencing. Sometimes it doesn't leave room for you to have your own interpretations or experiences of the game.
Yeah, I know what you mean. It can go both ways. If it's done well, it's really good, but yeah, I know what you mean.
So a good example is actually going back to Resident Evil 7. I think Ethan Winters in 7 and Village did a really good job of speaking at the right times, but not going too much. Whereas I am a little bit worried that this game might go the route of a character reacting verbally to everything that you see in the game, or just speaking too much in general, and I'll be a little bit worried about that, especially given recent trends of having weirdly jarring protagonists voicing their thoughts the whole time. So I would just hope that they don't go overboard on that aspect of the game, because typically, unless you're in cutscenes, the characters have been pretty quiet, and I think that that's always been a good decision in terms of the making of the game for that to be the case. We'll have to see. And the very last game that I wanted to talk about, the Silent Hill 2 Remake combat trailer also dropped as part of the State of Play, which was quite a cool thing to see, I guess. I mean, it is evident that they have improved the melee combat in the game. It also does resemble the Callisto Protocol's combat system quite a bit as well, which I've got mixed feelings about. It really does depend, I suppose, on just how much they lock you into those combat scenarios in the same way that Callisto Protocol did. but it looks like a sort of setting where you lock onto a character, you're able to freely control their movement, and you can swing and dodge attacks. It'll be an interesting one to see how that actually plays out. I have a feeling that it might get quite repetitive, but saying that, the melee combat in Silent Hill 2 was incredibly repetitive, depending on which enemies you were fighting as well. There wasn't anything special about it.
Well, and also combat's not really a focus of that game, right?
It's not. In a lot of cases, you want to be avoiding enemies,
Yeah.
and I just hope that they've retained that in the game rather than forcing you into encounters, because in my mind, that was one of the biggest mistakes that Callisto Protocol made, was filtering you into a lot of corridors where you couldn't get around the enemy, and the moment that you were hit, you were locked into combat with them in a way.
Yeah.
Whereas this game, just like Resident Evil, it needs to kind of retain that conserving ammunition and running away from enemies, because enemies are scarier rather than this kind of gung-ho character that's just beating the shit out of every zombie they come across with a pipe.
Yeah, exactly. And well, Silent Hill is also, it's more about the psychology from what I've seen, and I
Yes.
haven't really played it, but I've seen others play it a little bit. It's more about the psychology. You don't need to have it all guns blazing.
Speaking of all guns blazing, though, we did actually see a little bit of footage of some of the weapon usage as well. We saw pistol firing, potentially a shotgun firing, a hunting rifle as well.
Fairly standard sort of zombie fare.
Yeah, the kind of stuff that you're used to seeing in those sorts of things, but also a lot of familiar stuff from the original game as well. What I will say about that is that the aiming didn't look particularly good, but again, I think that only stands from a positive perspective. It's not like your character is like some military trained guy that's used to handling weapons all the time. I think this is probably, for James Sunderland, perhaps the first time he's fired a lot of these weapons. I wouldn't put it past the game to make shooting somewhat of a challenge. And again, it'll only just stand to reinforce the fact that a lot of the time, whenever possible, you should be running away from these things until you get locked in a room with a bunch of them and you need to defend yourself. And much like the Silent Hill title before that, we also saw a lot of the creepy imagery and familiar enemy designs in the game. It all looks really good. I'm looking forward to seeing that remake. I don't think I'm going to rush out and pick that one up. I think there's some other titles that I'd like to play before that.
You said that about Tekken 8, though.
I did.
And I know that you've been looking forward to Silent Hill for ages.
I have been looking forward to Silent Hill for ages, yeah. I think the thing that won't bend my arm is that no one else I know is probably going to pick this one up.
That's fair, yeah.
I think I'm like the only Silent Hill fan out of my friends group, mostly due to exposure reasons, I think, more than anything. But yeah, so I don't think I'll have anything bending my arm from that perspective. But, you know, I might well be tempted by this one. Who knows? Just looking at it, though, it is just very much a clean remake with a few added systems in the game. I'm not seeing a huge variation in terms of some of the puzzles and things like that. If the game packs in a fair amount of additional content in the same style as Resident Evil 4 Remake, then I might be tempted. But I think for the most part, this is a fairly straight conversion.
Fair enough. Final question from me on this. Do we have a release date yet?
Do you know what? I can't give you an honest answer to that question. I really didn't look to see if there was a release date. I think I just watched the trailers in sequence, but I really didn't actually take a look.
Just had a quick look, mate. Just says 2024. So still nothing, unfortunately.
Okay.
That's a shame.
We still got a ways to wait. I mean, that could be any time within the next 10 months. So.
Exactly.
Hopefully they're giving themselves room to breathe and making sure this is the best experience it can possibly be. I've got my fingers crossed, and all we can do is hope for the best. Okay, so that's about it for our coverage of the PlayStation State of Play, and it's time to move on to our second article of the week. The Pokemon Company makes an official statement on Palworld, with the quotes, "We intend to investigate."
This does not surprise me at all, having seen some of the pals that I hadn't seen previously. Some of them are literally exactly the same.
Not quite literally, but very heavily, almost literally. I honestly think that is where a lot of the stuff is coming from. And honestly, I don't necessarily know how serious Nintendo is actually taking this at the moment, because this statement is actually more, rather than to address the release of Palworld, it's actually to address the amount of inquiries that they've received as a result of Palworld.
Yeah.
And they put it in their statement as just another company's game released in January 2024. So they never actually name Palworld, but they say that they've received many inquiries regarding that release, and we have not granted any permission for the use of Pokemon intellectual property or assets in the game. Nintendo intend to investigate and take appropriate measures to address any acts that infringe upon intellectual property rights related to the Pokemon. And then they go on to say they'll continue to cherish and nurture each and every Pokemon in this world and bring the world together through Pokemon in the future. So without that bit at the end, it sounds like Number one, they're not naming the company. They're being very careful in legal terms. Number two, they're also just saying that they intend to investigate. They're not saying that there is any sort of thing that they've detected or that they actually are seeking to do anything. It just says that they'll investigate and take appropriate measures.
Yeah, I think it'll just be a case of they have a word about some of them. Just like, mate, most of them are fine.
You got to change the
right?
ears on that Lucario ripoff. You got to do.
Most of them are fine, right? But it's just like there's a couple there. Just maybe make their face a little rounder. Maybe don't give it exactly the same eyes. Yeah.
I think the thing is, and what a lot of people have discovered by importing these models into the model editors, is that some of the similarities between the models are just far too striking to not have been somehow edited from the original models. I think there's a lot of stuff in there where they're suggesting that they've taken the original model from the Pokemon, imported it in, created a new mesh for it, and then edited the model from there. And in a lot of cases, the models have been slightly adjusted. They'll have a slightly different stance. Their legs will be ever so slightly skinnier. But I can't deny there has been a lot of evidence I've seen on the internet recently where they've dragged and dropped the models over each other.
Yeah.
And you can almost certainly see like a real similarity between them that is really hard to deny.
I don't think it will be a case of we're going to sue you and take down your game. I think it will be have a look at those ones, just maybe tweak them a bit. Otherwise, we're going to have problems. Because Nintendo are very litigious. They do like to go after people.
Oh, 100%.
Yeah.
I mean, there is another news article, actually, coincidentally to this, that the Pokemon Company are actually chasing another company for copyright infringement based on Pokemon, a game called Pokezoo.
At least make the name a little different, guys.
Yeah, I think there's also some direct references to Pokemon within the game as well. So that one I feel like they truly have a case with. With Power World, I feel like it's a bit more nebulous. Even in the case of the Lucario edited Pokemon and things like that, I'm not sure whether you can actually copyright that design given the adjustments that they've made to it. I think, as you're absolutely correctly identified, it does bear a striking resemblance. However, from a legal perspective, I do think that Power World might just get away with this one, honestly.
Only time will tell.
And speaking of copyright cases this week, our third article of the day also relates to that. However, it's a different company this time, thankfully. An article from VG247, Sony pumps the brakes on Bloodborne Kart, but that doesn't mean it's outright cancelled. So, Bloodborne Kart is actually pretty much a joke game at this point, I think we can say.
Yeah.
And it very much came off of the back of the Bloodborne demake that was announced on PC and created by Twitter user Botster. And there was a lot of intrigue around this game because it was a fully playable game, I think up until the point of Gascoigne, where they had essentially recreated the PS4 title Bloodborne, all using PlayStation 1 available technology at the time, so it very heavily resembles a PlayStation 1 title, even down to some of the design choices, and certain aspects of the game were changed.
And crucially, the soundtrack.
But also things like the equipment system in the game as well. It was all changed to feel much more like the way they would have handled it in a PlayStation 1 game, where you're scrolling through the items one by one, rather than having like a large detailed menu that you're able to have on these higher resolution displays now. So this game was clearly made with a lot of love for Bloodborne. People were getting very excited by the actual real viable release of Bloodborne Kart as well, which looked to be a Bloodborne